So our iconic photography presentation is on the crowds at Berlin, taken in 1989. So first we're going to get into the visual analysis of this piece. So first we see the object, what the subject is. So it's a Western crowd, Western Berlin crowd gathered around a wall that has just been hoisted down by demonstrators around guard troops looking through this hole in the wall that has just been brought down. So we see in their expression, in the guard troops, we see it's almost a helpless expression, an expression of defeat, looking into a new light of society. And then we see a lot of emotion and passion for the situation, because these are probably family members who have family on the other side of the Berlin Wall. And their expression shows passion and interest in the situation based on the glances, and then of course this segues into the movement and how that shows what a momentous, victorious occasion this was. You can see by the man's hand on the wall and by the jumble of bodies mashed together, all looking around in different directions, the excitement and energy that's in this photo. So obviously this is a spontaneous photo, taken fly on the wall just as this wall is being hoisted down by those demonstrators. And it's also a symbol of liberation. So although these are guard troops, they're soldiers, it kind of has that connotation and feeling of a prisoner. They're all in the same uniform and very stiff. And so it's almost as if they're looking through a wall in a prison that they've been trapped by, of this Berlin Wall, trapped, and they're looking through the bars. And so this shows that kind of communist failure of their finally looking through the bars. And then of course the communism, the Berlin Wall fell not because of not because it was like a compromise, but because the communist society was desperate. So now we're going to go on to subject and composition. So there's a very obvious juxtaposition between the Eastern and Western Germans. So we see the Eastern Germans, and they're very stiff. They're in uniform. They're all in brown uniforms, and they're very orderly and in line. And then we see this in stark contrast to the vibrant movement of the West Berlin, obviously signifying a free capitalist society. And then we also see that individuality with those bright colors and the graffiti and the different movement there, based on, in contrast to that very plain brown. So we also see framing from the wall, and this also goes into natural light too. It puts the spotlight on these people where it's almost like a spaceship being opened into another world, and it frames them right as the focal point. And then that natural light, of course, puts the spotlight on them as the subject as well, being that the wall is finally falling and they're being introduced to another world. And then also this wall right here kind of guides our eye, the sharp angle guides our eye to the rest of the Western Berlin civilians and demonstrators. So we also see that this is a desolate setting, showing the disparity of the situation now kind of being brought to fruition. And then of course the point of view, it's taken at the level of the border troops. So it shows, it's supposed to be relatable to the border troops, of how, again, you're entering a new world and looking through this people into a free society. And then finally we see the layering in the foreground, the focal point, and the background. So in the background, and it shows a visual narrative. In the background we have this failing communist society, the building. We have the unification and people being brought into a unified society. And then we, of course, in the foreground we have a Western Berlin society.
All right, so in order to better understand this photograph that was taken in 1989 by Gerard Mali, we have to go back to the end of World War II. So after World War II ended, the city of Berlin was divided between East Berlin and West Berlin. So East Berlin was controlled by the Soviets, the USSR, and then West Berlin was divided between Britain, France, and the United States. And so What also emerged after the end of World War II was the beginning of a war known as the Cold War. And the Cold War wasn't a traditional war fought with guns and between soldiers on a large scale. Instead, it was more of an ideological war between democracy and capitalism against communism. So nowhere was this war and this battle of both economics and political ideologies on a better stage or a better showcase than in the city of Berlin, because you could easily see which part of the city was doing better and under which system. So after World War II ended, under the Marshall Plan, the US sent approximately $13.3 billion to Western Berlin to help them revitalize and revamp their economies after the war. This led to economic prosperity in Western countries along with Western Berlin, which was in stark contrast to Eastern Berlin, which was under the communist regime of the Soviet Union. And so what happened was a lot of people in East Berlin, they saw the economic prosperity of the West and they traveled over it. A lot of people began to emigrate from East Berlin to West Berlin. And what the Soviets realized is they were running out of workers and intellectuals for their labor force. And so they eventually constructed the wall in 1961 to divide the two cities. Now, the wall not only divided the cities, but it divided families, friends, and the citizens of Berlin themselves. Hundreds of people were passed away attempting to cross the wall, were shot and killed by border guards, and thousands more were taken into captivity. And so then the question is, how was the wall brought down? And so after the wall was brought up in the following years, we saw a large amount of protests from citizens or people that were under the Soviet rule. This included the whole Eastern Bloc, which was essentially controlled by the Soviet Union, as well as the people of East Berlin. One specific protest in East Berlin had approximately 500,000 people. And the people were demanding liberties and rights from this communist government. And one of the things that they demanded was the wall to be taken down. So thankfully, thanks to the leader of the Soviet Union at the time, Gorbachev was had a stance on history and he believed that he should let history happen and not stand in the way and use weapons or use violence to stop the wake of history. Instead, he allowed history to run its course. And this, along with a large-scale intervention by the U.S., a lot of democracy and political meetings, allowed the wall to then be taken down. And the taking down of the Berlin Wall was essentially the first step in the domino effect of the collapse of the Soviet Union and the end of the Cold War. So the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, as was the year that the picture was taken in. And then a year later, we saw the reunification of Germany as a single country, again, largely thanks to American intervention in European politics. And the leaders of the nations working together cooperatively to essentially rebuild and reconstruct this Europe. And so the next year, after 1990, in 1991, we saw the fall of the Soviet Union and essentially the end of the Cold War. So now, why is the photo iconic? From a historical perspective, the photo is iconic because it symbolizes the failure of communism. John F. Kennedy said, "Democracy may not be perfect, but at least I don't have to build a wall to keep my people in," which shows how the wall is essentially a prison, trapping the people of East Berlin in their side of the city, despite the fact that they want to leave. They want to go to Western Berlin, where there is a more prosperous economy and more opportunity. You obviously don't have the better political or economic system if you have to force your people to stay, and they're being forced to stay in East Berlin at the time. And it was also emblematic of the great change at the end of the Cold War. Of course, we see the fall of the Berlin Wall, and as I mentioned before, this led to the domino effect of the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union. So now Ryan's gonna wrap us up here with why this photo is visually iconic.
So this photo is visually iconic, of course, because of the energy of the scene. As I talked about before, you see the movement. It's almost like you could go right into the photo. And as the wall's coming down, you see it almost mid-collapse and the people looking through the people. And it also shows the harsh feelings of the time. And then secondly, and when you're just looking at it, it's very visually abrupt and striking. really abrupt and striking, almost as if the wall was the only thing. Even though it's a long diplomatic process to unify Eastern and Western Berlin, it's almost as if this wall coming down is going to unify everything, and it's this one singular momentous occasion that will create a better free society.
Thank you.